Presidential election vote counting continues in Nigeria. We'll have a live update. A new study on Ebola reveals that small children who get the disease have a far slimmer chance of survival. And a surprise announcement as a comedian from the continent is named as the next host of The Daily Show. Africa 54 starts right now. Good evening, I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. Well, tonight, the latest results from Nigeria's presidential election show challenger Muhammadu Buhari leading incumbent Goodluck Jonathan with only a few states left to be counted. With memories of post-election violence in 2011 still fresh, there are hopes for a peaceful outcome this time around. Reporter Kasti Bassett of Reuters has more.
A shock result in Nigeria's presidential race was looking likely after the votes of all but 2 states were counted, and the strain was showing. A ruling party official disrupted a count, saying he had no confidence in the result, which put opposition candidate Muhammadu Buhari ahead of President Goodluck Jonathan by over 3 million votes.
Buhari is leading, and we are very sure, Nigerians also are very sure that Buhari is the next president of this country.
It's not the first time the 2 leaders have taken each other on. Buhari, from the mostly Muslim north, lost to Jonathan from the largely Christian south in 2011. 3 days of bloodletting followed, in which 800 people were killed. Some are nervous another disputed outcome could trigger unrest.
Most people are still waiting back for the results to be released, so they will know if there will be chaos or not.
The new president faces many big challenges, in particular an oil-dependent economy which has seen its fortunes slide. Jeremy Stretch is head of FX at CIBC.
If we aren't going to see any substantive reversal in the oil price in the very early period, then I think it's going to be very difficult for the economy to bounce back very quickly and very aggressively, irrespective of the election results.
Diversification is needed, says Renaissance Capital's chief economist Charles Robertson.
It's going to have to rebalance the budget to try and broaden its tax base without being so dependent on the oil sector to provide the revenues. And that's tough. So there's been talk about raising VAT rate from 5% to 10%. Possibly removing the fuel subsidy. There's lots of items like that being discussed by investors at the moment.
Fitch cut the credit outlook of Africa's biggest economy to negative on Monday, citing political uncertainty.
Well, for the latest news on the race for the Nigerian presidency, we turn to VOA correspondent Peter Clotty, who joins us on the phone from Abuja. Peter, where does the vote counting stand right now?
Well, right now, the state of Sokoto was announced, and APC had 671,926. That is the main opposition party. And PDP, the ruling party, had 152,199. Now, the principal officer at Sokoto is just announcing the result right now as we speak. However, before these numbers were announced, APC is now leading with 13,757,575, with the PDP having 10,512,932. So the difference right now, before Sokoto came in, was 3,244,643. And there are 2 more states that are coming up that will determine who wins the president. So far you have Delta, that is yet to come, and Borno. Now Delta is projected to go for President Goodluck Jonathan, and Borno is projected to go to Muhammadu Buhari. So it looks, as we speak now, that the chairman of the Electoral Commission, after these 2 states, will declare possibly, from all indications that we've seen with these numbers, that General Muhammadu Buhari will be declared the next president of Nigeria.
And we know that both of them have met the minimum 25% in 24 states. Do you get the sense that Nigerians are getting used to the idea that General Buhari is going to become the next president of Nigeria?
It appears so. When you go to the principal street of Abuja, particularly, some people have been trooping to General Muhammadu Buhari's party headquarters. It's been adorned for celebration, and people are trooping there as we speak right now. We drove in because we had a little bit of it, but APC has also won 61 Senate seats against 48 by the PDP. So right now you're looking at a majority in the Senate, and PDP will go to the minority. So yes, indeed, Nigerians have come to terms with it because it appears they went overwhelmingly in favor of General Muhammadu Buhari.
Very quickly, earlier on, there was this official from the PDP who tried to interrupt actually the announcement of the vote. Was this kind of one small isolated incident, or have we witnessed any of such incidents in different parts?
It was a one isolated incident. Former Minister Godse Peter Olubebe really caused a stir here. Now, but yesterday there was another party that raised concern, but it was more decorous. It was calm. They expressed their concern. Professor Jigar, the chairman of the Electoral Commission, replied and answered the question and said that, INEC will be looking into some of the reports that have come in. However, the former minister, Peter Olubebe, wasn't having it, and I spoke with him less than 2 minutes ago before I came on Africa 54, and he's still not pleased with Professor Jigar's response, saying that they're going to challenge the results.
Okay, Peter, excellent reporting. Thank you very much. VOA's Peter Clottey reporting from Abuja, Nigeria. Well, now we move on to the crisis in Yemen. Iran's foreign ministry says its government had sent aid to Yemen, but denied shipping weapons to the country, where a Saudi-led coalition is conducting airstrikes to try to stop Iranian-backed rebels. Iran's state-run news agency quoted foreign ministry spokeswoman Merzia Afkan saying allegations of arms shipments to the Houthis were complete fabrications. Meanwhile, coalition warplanes continued bombing the capital Sana'a, including hitting a weapons storage area Monday, triggering huge explosions. Another airstrike earlier Monday killed at least 45 people and wounded another 65 near a refugee camp in northern Yemen. Since last Thursday, a Saudi-led coalition has conducted an aerial bombardment throughout the country against Yemen's Houthi Shia rebels. But Yemen's foreign ministry blames a Houthi artillery strike for the refugee camp casualties.
This is really untrue. They are always trying to have what is called a human shield. Houthis, they are going to places where there is some population or residential houses, and they are trying to put their weapons there. Sometimes also they use, when there is some aeroplanes coming, they are hitting the residential places or refugee camp or whatever.
Well, a spokesman for the International Organization for Migration says it was not immediately clear how many of those killed were civilians or armed personnel. Well, a humanitarian agency, or rather humanitarian agencies, are warning that more than 2.5 million people are facing food insecurity in South Sudan since a civil conflict broke out in December 2013. VOA's Gabe Jossello, reporting from opposition-held territory, explains why a crisis in the making often does not look like one until it is too late.
When all other options are exhausted, people here in Lankian, South Sudan, strip leaves from the trees as their last resort for food. Poor harvests, conflict, and constraints on trade have pushed this area into what humanitarian agencies have classified as a level 3 food crisis, 2 steps below famine. Nabi al-Mashar says she and her family are running out of supplies and have no income for food.
There's no employment here and no money. We get very little support, so I will survive on what I can get from the forest, wild fruits and leaves.
Lankian is in the heartland of the opposition, where mostly ethnic Nuer rebel soldiers have taken up arms against the government of President Salva Kiir. Because the area is surrounded by government forces, the town is becoming increasingly isolated. This market is usually the center of activity in Lankian, but since the current conflict has shut down the surrounding roads, there's only one trade route coming in from Ethiopia. So the limited amount of supplies are really jacking up the prices of commodities here and putting the pressure on the local community. Well, the stress is severe here. It may not seem as apparent as in other parts of the country that are closer to famine. The local humanitarian coordinator for the county, War Bielpam, says to the outsider, this place may not seem like it is food insecure, but look closer.
If you could come before crisis, the market was so big, a lot of food, a lot of commodities, but nowadays there's not enough food. People are many, you can see many people are moving around, densely populated in this area, and the food is not enough.
United Nations airdrops and the distribution of basic dry foods have helped stave off a much worse crisis. But the deliveries are not always on schedule, and stocks from the last drop are already running low. Humanitarian groups are considering ways to better support the population during the coming rainy season, according to Alberto Maquer of Oxfam.
If not direct food distribution or whatever support we are giving, then it will mean other intervention like cash, maybe giving to traders to make sure that they buy a lot of this good during dry season, and during wet season there will still be a lot of goods in the market for people to access.
Rains are not expected until May, which means as food supplies dry up and conflict blocks access and movement, people here are going to have to dig deep and keep doing whatever it takes to survive. Gabe Joselo, VOA News, Lankian, South Sudan.
Well, the non-profit Bread for the World Institute says improving agriculture on small farms is critical to reducing hunger. In its 2015 hunger report, when women flourish, we can end hunger. Bread for the World says because a majority of those engaged in small-scale farming are women, there is need to achieve greater gender equality and eliminate discrimination against women and girls as a way to fight hunger. For more insight, I'm joined by Faustine Wabwire, a senior foreign assistance policy analyst at the Bread for the World Institute. Ms. Wabwire, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, we know that in South Sudan, of course, there are other factors that have contributed to food insecurity. But in your report, you say generally across the continent, women are the major producers of the food that sustains all the populations across the continent. And
right.
Therefore, why is it important to focus on them?
As you rightly say, Vincent, evidence shows that actually between 60 to 70% of the food that's produced on the continent is through women's efforts around the world, around the continent. And so as part of bringing this issue to the fore, it's difficult for policymakers to really address the issue and contribute to food security of countries and families and communities unless there's that targeted approach, understanding who is contributing to the agricultural productivity of the country and national economies.
Now, you know, small-scale farming has been a traditional activity of all communities in Africa. Do you get a sense that perhaps because it has never been taken to a level where it is seen as a commercial venture, that it doesn't necessarily fit into a national policy? It is taken for granted as just some activity that is there and will always be there?
Absolutely. In our report, we actually touch on the issue of unpaid care. And when you look at that at a more deeper level, you realize that a lot of the contribution and efforts that women are making, including growing food and caring for the family and nurturing and preparing food, are actually efforts that are not seen as part of the economy, and yet they really do matter. And especially because if women had more access to productive resources, for example, just extension services, better access to seeds, to credit, this would make a big difference to national economies.
Now, very quickly, why is it that women don't have access to credit right now as we speak?
It's simply gender discrimination. It's very interesting. People don't often think about it like that. So when you open this conversation, somebody would immediately say, well, men too. But you need to look at the data, and that's why the report really puts an emphasis on data, availability of data to inform policy making. Because without that, then we really are just doing a lot of work without understanding what makes difference.
That most of the land, say in Africa, is actually family owned. It's held in trust by the entire family. So all those people who work on the farm are just members of the family. It doesn't necessarily belong to the woman.
That's what we think. But you visit some of these families and you actually realize that there's a distinction between who grows what kinds of crops, for example. We were in Rwanda and Malawi as part of preparing this report, and we would often hear stories of these are male crops and these are women crops. So, for example, the cash crops would tend to be in the hands of men, whereas other staple foods would be hands of women, in which case, if there's some expectation of income, then you can realize that women are not having access to that.
In less than a minute, what is it you would tell, say, the government of Africa and any other organization that they should do to make it possible for women to produce more, but also gain and benefit personally from agricultural activities?
First of all, I think there needs to be fulfillment of the commitments that governments have made, especially in Africa. The Maputo Declaration 10 years ago, only a handful of African countries have fulfilled this. That's at overall level. Secondly, then, be more targeted. Understand who is producing the food, what are their needs, and understand better the needs of men and women as relates to the agriculture economy of the countries.
Right, and I believe, remember always that the mamas are the ones who really feed the continent.
We should remember that all the time.
Not big commercial farms.
Absolutely.
Well, Faustin, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. Well, Faustin Wabwire is a Senior Foreign Assistance Policy Analyst at the Bread for the World Institute. We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, Ebola and children. How the virus poses special dangers to its youngest victims. Stay with us.
Wherever you are, Voice of America is on air, reaching more than 130 million weekly, worldwide, in more than 40 languages. Online, social media, and breaking news from around the world. On the go, dozens of new features on popular platforms with new apps and trending topics. Voice of America, on air, online, on the go.
Well, it's time for our Tuesday Health Report, and joining us now is Africa 54 Health correspondent Lino Medum with the latest news in the fight against Ebola.
A study led by scientists at the World Health Organization and Imperial College London found that although Ebola infection rates are lower in children than adults, babies and toddlers who get the disease have a far slimmer chance of survival. The researchers found that the virus, which causes hemorrhagic fever and induces internal and external bleeding, profuse vomiting and diarrhea, is killing 90% of infants in the current outbreak and around 80% of children between 1 to 4 years old. Dr. Christopher Dye is the Director of Strategy at WHO, team leader on Ebola. He says, given the result of the study, children need specialized care.
One of the striking findings of our study is that very young children, infants and neonates, have a strikingly high mortality rate. More than 90% of children of that age group die from Ebola. In an Ebola epidemic, everybody needs special care, but the very youngest children need obviously very special care indeed. With that special care, we know that their survival rates can be improved. The question we face is how best to put that quality of care in place. In the way that we manage Ebola at the moment, very clearly, young children need prompt diagnosis, immediate care. They need close personal contact, not just of physicians, but also ideally with family members too.
The report, which was published recently in the New England Journal of Medicine, analyzed data on Ebola cases in children under 16 in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Now, the U.S. National Institutes of Health says 2 experimental Ebola vaccines have shown positive results in a clinical trial conducted in Liberia. The clinical trial started in February and found that the vaccines from GlaxoSmithKline and biotech startup New Link Genetics Corp appeared to be safe when administered to patients exposed to Ebola virus. The GSK vaccine was developed with NIAID scientists, and the No-Link vaccine was developed by the Public Health Agency of Canada. Each vaccine was given in a single injection and tested for safety and efficacy on more than 600 people in Liberia. The mid-stage clinical trial sponsored by the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, a branch of NIH. Dr. Anthony Fauci is the director of National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases.
The original purpose of the trial was to determine if you could protect people in Liberia. But right now, since there are essentially no new infections except for one very recent one in Liberia, that what we need to do is to collect data to determine whether or not it induces the kind of response that you would hope would be protected, but also in negotiations with authorities in the other West African countries, such as in Guinea and Sierra Leone, to see if we could extend the trial there. In phase 2, you want to get a good distribution. Since there were only 16% women, we're going to specifically try to correct that, so when we do the additional 900 to bring the total to 1,500, we'll have a relative equality between men and women in the study.
And the volunteers will be followed for at least a year with blood samples tested 6 and 12 months after vaccination to determine how long the immune response lasts. Now, Ebola has claimed the lives of more than 10,000 people in West Africa. Since last summer, researchers have rushed to get anti-Ebola vaccines into clinical trials. While it's too early to say that any of the potential vaccines work, well, some scientists say they are seeing strong results from some of the studies. VOA's Carol Pearson tells us more.
It's ironic. Just as the Ebola epidemic in West Africa seems to be waning, clinical trials of potential vaccines are underway there. A vaccine candidate is currently being tested in Guinea, where the Ebola virus is still active. Those likely to get the vaccine are medical workers and people who have been exposed to the virus. Liberia has so few new Ebola cases that a clinical vaccine trial started there may be continued in Sierra Leone or Guinea. At Emory University in the U.S., an investigational vaccine was given to an American doctor who may have been exposed to the virus at an Ebola treatment unit in Sierra Leone. Dr. Mark Mulligan reported the effects of the vaccine in the Journal of the American Medical Association.
We saw strong responses from the innate immune system, the immediate responses, the first defenders in our body, and also from the subsequent antibodies and T cells that we want a vaccine to produce.
The patient did not develop the Ebola virus, and he may not have been infected, but the immune response is what the doctors hope to see. Dr. Thomas Geisbert was one of the researchers who developed this potential vaccine. Despite reports that researchers are closing in on an effective vaccine, he says there's still a lot of work to do.
A lot of these different vaccines and treatments were developed against one species of Ebola, and a particular strain of that species. So there are 5 different species of Ebola virus. 3 of those cause disease and morbidity and mortality in man.
Dr. Geisbert says a vaccine that might work against the Zaire Ebola virus, the species circulating in West Africa, might not work against another type of deadly Ebola virus. But if the vaccines are proven to work, Dr. Jesse Goodman says they could still be used in West Africa.
It could benefit people if this outbreak went the wrong way again, and even more importantly, these could be incredibly important tools for future outbreaks.
The results of the vaccine trial in Guinea could be available in July. Carol Pearson, VOA News, Washington.
And that's our Africa Health Report for today. Back to you, Vincent.
Well, thanks a lot, Lenore. Be sure to watch Lenore Madu's Health Reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. And it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54 with a South African comic will soon become a household name in the U.S. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. In Burundi, at least 10 people are dead in landslides after a heavy rainfall destroys homes on the outskirts of the capital, Bujumbura. In Libya, one Filipino oil worker killed and 5 seriously wounded in a rocket attack in Zawiya. In Nigeria, opposition candidate Muhammadu Buhari has a narrow lead over President Goodluck Jonathan as vote counting continues and tensions rise. Finally, in Kenya, 10 months after self-defense empowerment classes to arm girls with tools, rape cases in the country dropped to 38%. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Well, just coming in right now from Nigeria. Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan has just called the opposition candidate, General Muhammadu Buhari, to congratulate him for winning this year's presidential election. That's the latest from Nigeria. And now, here's what's trending. A South African comedian has been named the new host of The Daily Show. South African comedian Trevor Noah will take over hosting duties from Jon Stewart on the popular late-night talk show at the end of the year. The 31-year-old Noah has appeared on The Daily Show 3 times. In an interview with The Times, Noah said his new job presented both an opportunity and a challenge. Jon Stewart said he is thrilled for Noah on the show. Well, next up, surprising I am sorry from Taraji P. Henson, star of the hit American TV show Empire. Henson has apologized to police in the Californian city of Glendale for accusing an officer of racially profiling her son. Henson posted a statement on Instagram hours after the Glendale Police Department released a video of a traffic stop of the actress's son that showed the officer respectfully dealing with a 20-year-old. Henson acknowledged he had marijuana in his backpack and was cited for having it without a valid prescription. Now, the officer did not cite him for the traffic violation, but confiscated the marijuana. And that is what is trending today. And that is our show. Have a good night. Thanks for watching. We're able to touch on things that are important to people on an everyday basis. Hello and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. In a lively half hour, news, sports, health, lifestyle information, comments from our viewers. Africa 54, the best for Africa, about Africa. Join us only on VOA.